Hello everyone, it's June 3rd, 2020, and this is St. Mark's at Midweek. I'm Matt Wright. Amid vigils, protests, curfews, and police violence set off by the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, associate producer Lucy Grindon offers the St. Mark's community a chance to reflect. She interviews Suzanne Edwards-Acton, vice president of the Los Angeles branch of the Union of Black Episcopalians and chair of the program group on Black ministry for the Diocese of LA. But first, our pastor, the Reverend Carrie Patterson Grindon, is here for a quick update. Hi, Carrie.
Hey, Matt.
We've been sitting here for something like 3 months having these talks every week. Every week I ask you how it's going. Every week it seems a little bit more challenging than the week before. And since we talked last week, things have taken another sort of quantum leap into complexity. And I was interested in knowing what you're hearing from people at St. Mark's. I know how I feel, and I know what a confusing time it is, but what are you feeling and what are you hearing from people in our community?
That's not an easy answer. So I guess I can start with how I'm feeling. I think I'm cautious about speaking for people, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that we're all feeling exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And that was true just because of the pandemic and this long journey we've been on of social distancing and separation and reinvention and all of that. So that exhaustion has sort of hit a high point. And that was, as you say, all before the devastating news of the last week and the murder of George Floyd and other killings that happened before that. I feel like I want to be a little careful, but no, I don't. I mean, the antics, and unhelpful non-leadership, at the highest levels, destructive words and actions coming from people we look to or want to look to for authority in positive ways. Both the encouragement of the protests and the kinds of people showing up together at the protests, but also that wild destruction that's going on and trying to sort through all of that. I mean, it's such an intense and exhausting, painful time for everybody. And I feel that, and I'm hearing that too. I'm hearing and seeing on Facebook and hearing from conversations I'm having in the community these seeds of hope and signs of encouragement and words of encouragement alongside real despair and legitimate anger and hope too. It's all getting expressed in all kinds of ways. I have been calling some members of the community just to talk on the phone, just to see how they're doing, and I hear a mixture of all of that in those conversations, and I'm feeling like I believe our community, St. Mark's, is coming to a place of reckoning, for lack of a better word, a call to really get clear about where we are and what is our work to do in a way that it's never been quite this crystal clear for me. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that we have work to do, both self-examination and communal examination. And I feel this deep call to recommit myself and for our community to recommit ourselves to our baptismal vow, particularly the last vow we make, which is to work for justice and peace and respect the dignity of every human being. And I just think we need to keep that vow and look together at the best way to do that.
I have a sense that people generally are working really intentionally right now to try to get things straight and to try to right a badly listing ship. I feel like for much of our lives, we have paid lip service and done some work in that regard. But I feel like at the end of the day, we always believed somehow the ship would right itself. Somebody would step in. There would be somebody at the top to sort of settle things down and make things right. And what's clear to me now is that that work has to be done by all of us, and there's no way to avoid it. And I see, we're talking on Tuesday afternoon, late in the afternoon, and I can see there are more protests today in Los Angeles. They lack so far the violence and the anarchy that characterized the last few days. I feel like people are beginning to settle down, beginning to organize themselves and their thoughts a little bit more, and beginning to focus on how serious all of this is. And we were at the vigil last night at Triangle Park over at Lake and Altadena Drive. And it was a tremendous, passionate, pointed protest and vigil. But it was also peaceful. It was also, I think, representative of much of the Altadena community, people of color, white people, old, young, families, little kids, grandmothers and grandfathers, single people, some of the town characters, everybody, but everybody was there focused on what was going on and glad to be a part of it, glad to be with each other, and glad to be serious in their purpose. And I felt a sense of hope coming from that. And I see a little bit more of that character in the protests going on this afternoon. That could change. But I think people seem to they seem to be coming to grips with the idea that this is really serious work and that our ability to function as a society depends on whether we get this right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think as a white person, I'm seeing that in a way I've never, the image you started with, in a way that I've never fully seen it before. That the work truly is all of ours to do, and that the suffering and pain of my brothers and sisters of color is my suffering too, and it's my role to help right the ship. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And it's a giant piece of work. And so I hope that all the members of our community, our leadership, and all our members will collaborate in discerning our piece of that work as a church, and at the same time that each of us will be looking for our own particular individual way to help heal and bring justice and equality for everybody.
Yeah. Well, we're going to leave it there this week, and we'll talk again next week, and hopefully we'll have better news and brighter things to talk about. But thanks for digging deep this week.
Thanks, Matt.
And now it's time for Lucy Grindon's visit with Suzanne Edwards-Acton of the Union of Black Episcopalians.
Suzanne Edwards-Acton is a member of the St. Mark's community, the vice president of Los Angeles' H. Belfield Hannibal chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians, and the chair of the program group on Black ministry for the Diocese of Los Angeles. I spoke with her about the online vigil that was held on Sunday by UBE in response to the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And I also talked with her about her work with UBE and with the diocese. Finally, we discussed the program she created, which is called My Work to Do. My Work to Do is an online affinity group designed to help white people build stamina for discussing racism, systemic injustice, racial healing, reconciliation, and justice in their everyday lives. The next session starts on June 11th. All are welcome, and you can register for free at myworktodo.com. Here's my conversation with Suzanne. You just attended an online prayer vigil for racial justice and healing organized by the Union of Black Episcopalians. So, I, like, as you know, I wanted to attend that vigil, but I wasn't able to get in because there were so many people there.
Sure.
But how was it?
Yeah, it was really lovely, and kind of interesting too, because we got Zoom bombed, which I've never experienced before. I've heard a lot about it, so but I wasn't actually surprised. But it was nice. It was a kind of an urgent response to the community to just try and bring us together. I mean, it's the national UBE that called the meeting. So, or I guess it wasn't a meeting, but they called the time together, the vigil. And I got a call 2 days ago, just asking me if I would present as a representative of our local chapter here in Los Angeles. And I said, if I was to write a letter, then you could contribute a sentence or two, what would be the sentence or two that you would contribute to this kind of collective letter that we would write to like our grandchildren as Black Episcopalians. So the sentences that I read, it was like a compilation of those responses that I got back.
What was your idea or your reasoning behind framing the sentences as part of a letter to grandchildren or
grandchildren? Yeah. That came actually from something that I had experienced recently, where a gentleman who wrote a book, he happens to be gay, and he said he wrote a book when he had 2 children, and he wanted to write a letter to his kids about just himself and being gay, and he wanted them to know how much he loved that about himself and how much he celebrated that about himself. And so he thought he wanted to write a book, and so he was thinking, how would I express that and in this book or whatever, and thought, well, how about if I write it as a letter, because then it's going to be very personal. And so that's what it was. I wanted to hear from them personally, rather than just hey, how you doing? And then it would be kind of a news report, right? I don't know. I wanted it to just be something a little more on the personal side. So I figured, we talk a lot in the Black community about ancestors and elders and our community and all of that. So to me, to have a letter, but to our grandchildren, had kind of almost seeing this event then as a little bit of a historic event, right? Because if you're writing to your grandchildren, they're not, either they're really, really young right now, or they're not even born right now. Or they might be older, depending on some of the older ones. But I mean, it's kind of, is you as as an elder, sort of, what thoughts would you want to share of your perspective in 1 or 2 sentences? What would you want to share with this, this not necessarily young, it could be a 50-year-old grandchild, if you're in your 70s or 80s, but to the youth as you see it, right, from whatever perspective. And that's why I chose that. It was to try and make it personal.
What were some of the perspectives or ideas that were shared in the sentences you collected?
How I clustered them was at the beginning, and I didn't do it on purpose. I just okay, so what order do I want to put these in? And as I took them out of, off of a text message, copied it, moved it to the notes to place it, I just tried to put it in a place where it felt like it made sense. So at the beginning, the first few were ones where people were basically kind of talking about the tragic event of George Floyd's, of the actual murder event, right? So people who sort of reflected on that, and then came with that was sort of, a lot of it was a reflection on how they were feeling about it as they were watching it happen on the news. And then the next one sort of felt right, happened to be ones that were, a few of them were kind of, they were reflecting on, like, one said, I have a 9-year-old grandchild, basically like, to my 9-year-old grandchild, I hate that your innocence is being taken away by the fact that we have to have the talk, which in the Black community is a talk about how you need to act when you're confronted with typically like the police, but just with someone coming at you because of your Blackness. So, and another one said, so these two were both about children, right? This other one said something about, we have twin sons, and they're 7-year-old twin sons, and we thought that they would have a different future than the one that, than the stuff that we have to deal with, and now we are uncertain, or something along those lines. Now we're unsure. We're doubtful, I think was the word. And then there was sort of a few that were around, so those were reflecting on their children and grandchildren. A few were more kind of, I guess, kind of big idea, kind of more existential, like if we don't look at how what a consumerist, a capitalist society, it was a little bit about like greed. It was more about the ways we live, about not caring, concern about other people, and more about isms, like we need to really look at racism and sexism and capitalism and all that. Like we need to look at these bigger, more existential ideas and the ways we live. And actually I skipped a section because there was a couple that reflected on just feeling hated as Black people, how society does not honor us. They have lesser care concern. One person reflected on being a healthcare worker, and the statistics around the fact that African Americans are dying at a higher rate than the number we are in a number of us in population, and how it hurts to know that non-Black Episcopalians specifically said that my non-Black Episcopalians either don't really understand or know anything about that, or they don't seem to be too concerned about that. And then a couple people did reflect on their church, and said, one person was actually quite positive and said, I love that my church is holding services for us to be participating in. But pretty much other people were asking questions like, we need to be like this. And I wonder, is my church going to be one of those congregations that cares about this? And about 3 people asked questions similar to that about their church community. And then a couple people just like wrote one simple line, like, I'm scared for my sons. I'm scared for my Black sons. That came up 2 or 3 times actually. And then the last one was, something to the effect of, I sit in despair, like hoping for fortitude, I think was the word. I leave with us as my Pentecost gift.
I also wanted to ask you, what it was like being Zoom bombed. You mentioned to me before
Sure.
that that's something that the organizers were prepared for. So how did that go? Who was in charge of dealing with that situation?
Well, I don't, they actually handled it pretty well, but I don't know if honestly they were like completely prepared for it, because when it jumped in, some of the people who were listening, you could tell were like, wait, what's happening? And a few people went off when it happened. Actually, numbers of people did. They just jumped off the phone, they hung up. And that gave us space to some people who weren't able to get on the call. A few people more than a few were able to get on, because some people, like one of the people that a person who was helping somebody else be on the call, said that they hung up because they just couldn't, they didn't want to hear it. So because for some people it's super triggering and offensive and hurtful, and just adds more trauma to the whole thing that's going on right now. So some people just left. I just wasn't surprised because someone had posted it on Facebook. But in this particular case, the email that we had was really just kind of, it was sort of for UBE members, and they're people and their friends, but someone posted it widely on Facebook. Yeah, it was specific. Clearly the person knew that they were Zoom bombing a Black event, because what they said, what the content of it was specific.
That's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess it would be good for people to learn from this, especially if they're sort of guests, like white people joining a call that's really intended or organized by a Black organization. To learn from this, that you shouldn't be publicizing that kind of information, Zoom invitations publicly, when it's supposed to be an internal Zoom event.
And I'm sure the person was well intentioned when they did it, trying to be like excited with us to, and I think probably, if I had to guess, the person maybe saw that slightly like as activism, you know what I mean? Like, I want to share this with people. I want to show that I want to share this. I'm sure that was probably the spirit that was in. We wouldn't have posted it like that.
So tell me more about the Union of Black Episcopalians itself, the organization that organized this Zoom event.
Sure. So the Union of Black Episcopalians, that the branch that organized it was the national UBE. And so we have, our chapters, we have our local chapters, and then there is the national, that's kind of the unifying, what would you call that, like branch of it or organization. The point is really to, I can read you the mission, which I don't know if that's kind of extra, but the point is we are a community for each other, but we also are in our like, the roots of who we are is, it is a space for like Black Episcopalians to like own our own space, right? So we are not like a program of a diocese. We are literally a collection of people who are Black, who are Episcopalians. The mission, I can tell you, is to unite diverse cultures, concerns, and gifts of Black Episcopalians by providing preparation and encouragement for living the baptismal covenant and fully participating in the mission and governance of the Episcopal Church. So that is a really important part of it. It has to do with helping us to become leaders in our communities, like at the church level, whether that be vestry, whether that be delegates to convention, whether that be helping with any of the other leadership roles within the church, and then within the bigger church, whether that be to be what are they called, to general convention. I don't think those are called delegates, but to do any of the roles that are in the bigger aspects of the ways that our church functions. It's calling us to take on some of those roles as leaders within church, so that we are also the decision makers, and help to create some of our own destiny within the Episcopal Church. And that is rooted in the fact that we needed to do that in order for our church, unfortunately, and our church honestly has a pretty significant racist history that kind of mirrors and parallels the history of our country. So the Union of Black Episcopalians was Black Episcopalians taking, being advocates for their own, and advocating for our own kind of rights within the Episcopal Church. I think we love the Episcopal Church, and we are fully included in some aspects and in some settings, and not in others. So,
tell me a little bit more about your own work with UBE, and also a little bit about your work with the LA Diocese.
Sure. So UBE being, like I said, it's kind of a freestanding organization, really, that is just a gathering of Black Episcopalians. I'm the vice president of our chapter, which is the H. Belfield Hannibal chapter. And there are many people, several members of St. Mark's, who are involved in the chapter as well. Like Kathy Telton is our secretary, and Rose West is soon will be our treasurer when we vote. I think that's going to happen. And Jeanette Allen is actually participates in a lot of things as well. So I hope I'm not forgetting anyone, but I'm sure I am. But so then there is also the program group on Black ministry, which is different in the fact that that is the diocesan gathering of Black people. And that one is, for the most part right now, it's much more clergy focused, although it is open for lay participation. I think it is like a program of the diocese. It is designed to be a community of people who help the diocese to be connected to and understand the cares and concerns of the Black Episcopalians, and not just the Black community, but also like the Black Episcopalians, sort of from a more internal diocesan level. So it helps to inform the diocese, as opposed, that's a little different role. Plans diocesan events and stuff like that, which is, it's a little different. I actually work pretty closely with Bishop Diane Bruce as in sort of a consulting sort of a role in some ways, when there's questions, things that she's wondering about, or if there's things that the Black community wants to communicate to the diocese. That's kind of what the program group is. It's kind of that place where that exchange happens.
The last thing that I want to ask you about is your My Work to Do project. So can you tell me how that got started, how it works, and how you contributes to the goals of racial justice and healing?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. So I started, this is sort of, I think, just a personal, and to some degree, it's a personal passion project. I was the director of the Episcopal Urban Intern Program for 6 or 7 years. And that is a year of service program where young people from across the country, 21 to 28, 29-year-olds come, and they live a year in intentional community together, and they serve at nonprofits throughout Los Angeles. And so across the country, from like a national level, doing a year of service is highly white female. It's like a highly white female opportunity. I mean, anyone can be in it, but that's who we see statistically participates with the highest, statistics, I guess you would call it. Anyway, so, and people, I think, come and they experience Los Angeles, which if you've been born and raised in Los Angeles, like I was, you really, I won't say for anyone else, I really did not to the fullest degree understand how diverse Los Angeles is in comparison to the rest of the country, barring a few other very diverse places. And I know the diversity isn't as much, but I really did not understand the degree to which that is true. So as the director, I met many people, young people, who had an experience here that was life-altering, and they would then go back to wherever they had come from throughout the country, and their eyes had been open to things that they otherwise wouldn't have understood, or even just maybe they didn't necessarily completely understand it, but they were exposed to things that come with diversity that they hadn't known up to that point in their lives. So I oftentimes will have alumni then say to me, I'm different now, and the people around me, wherever I am at home, they sometimes don't understand why I have such a care now around racial justice, and I want to do something. That was often the thing. I want to do something. So, from time to time, I'd be like, well, why don't you start a book group and, read something together, or why don't you? And I would just give ideas of things people could do.
And I group with alums of this program, or with
at home
community?
Well, it could be with alums, sure, it could be, but I would also often actually suggest that they do things. Yeah, that's a great question. It was really with like friends at home and your family or your coworkers, or just for wherever you go back. If you go back to Madison, Wisconsin, you go back to Cincinnati, you go to Cleveland, you go to New York, you go to Washington State, so wherever you are, start something there. Oftentimes it was the white alumni who are like, I really want to do something. And I feel disconnected now from the diversity that I experienced when I was in EUIP, which is now called JYLA. And so I would just give suggestions about things they could possibly do, but then I'll talk to people, a month or a year later, and they haven't really tried anything. So what happened was an article came out, and I probably saw it on Facebook, to be honest with you. It was an article called white women learning calculus in a schoolhouse on fire. And it was a white woman writing to other white women. And she was talking about how white women have a tendency to side with white supremacy, even if they speak out against anything like that. Mm-hmm. The article just basically is a white woman talking to white women about that pattern that she has seen. And she says that if white women were to actually take a look at that, they would be able to see that pattern. And we, at this point, could have a multicultural coalition of women across the country that could help us to shift the narrative of our country. So that's what the article was. And I have always told my white friends, as well as the alumni of UIP, that white people need to start talking to white people about race. I just hold that to be true. And it's just based on my own personal life experience, having lived in a highly Black community for a part of my life, and then moving to a primarily white suburb. So I've had experiences and life events and, hard times and great times in both of those contexts, that my experience has shown me that white people don't talk to people about race pretty much at all anyway, but they don't talk to each other particularly about it, and specifically about whiteness. So this article, though, talked about it. And I thought that was a great kind of jump off point for having some of these conversations that I had talked about. So I called two of the alumni and I said, hey, I want to show you this, how we could have a conversation about this. So we used that article, and we had a conversation, the three of us, one day by Zoom. Actually, this was about 2 years ago, far before anybody else. I mean, of course, people were using it, but very, very few people were using it comparatively. And so I said, so why don't you invite some friends and we can do another conversation, like a circle conversation about the article. You invite some of your friends and I'll help to facilitate it. Because I'm an educator, so that was really comfortable for me to do. And I've led circles around race for a number of years now with the UIP, and before that too. So they, neither of them really invited many of their friends. I started inviting my friends, my white friends, to sit with us and talk about it, just to show them, help facilitate it. And it just started to grow. And what I ended up putting together was like a 5-week series focused first on that article, and then some other pieces of content, a couple videos, a couple of articles. And I started just sharing that with people over the course of the last 2 years. And then in September of this past year, I applied for one of the Becoming Beloved Community Episcopal Church grants, which is specifically around racial justice and trying to help us to become beloved community through that term. And so I received that grant. And so then at that point, I was able to put together my curriculum with a little more, with some help from a couple of the people who had participated in the project before, over the course of the last 2 years, and also to expand the reach of, and now the interesting thing is, Lucy, that in the last 48 hours, we right now today have 39 people.
Wow.
Who have registered for my next, and I talked to you just, I think it was yesterday or something, to tell you, I think I was at like 20 something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it right now is at 39. So in like the last 48 hours, we have a registration. People are, I think, basically what it is, it's the context. It's not only for white people, but it is completely, it is intended to be a space for white people to learn how, which my explanation is, it's a place for white people to build stamina in engaging in conversations about race, and not just about race, because oftentimes white people tend to think of race as being, it's about Black and brown people or about others, but actually whiteness is a part of the race story, which of course race isn't real. It's a social construct, but it has a real and very real impact, right? We know that. Mm-hmm. So it's a space for white people to start. Sorry, say again.
I was going to say, I'm thinking right now about Amy Cooper and about how white
sure, and it's absolutely about that.
Get in touch with their own relationship with white supremacy and those structures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it is a place for white people to come and safely, uncomfortably often, yes, but safely talk about race. And more specifically about whiteness, like systems of whiteness, white racial identity, just to learn about what it is to be white. And people do know, but they don't know. People know from actually a pretty young age that something's up, they don't really know what it is, and then maybe don't build the vocabulary. And so, like I said, it's a place to build a stamina around that, because once people start to have really start to get it, then they start to become uncomfortable, tend to become uncomfortable, because it's an uncomfortable conversation. And for people of color, we tend to, not everyone, these are generalizations, but we tend to start processing this at a younger age because it's part of our world, it's part of our thing. But part of whiteness is to not do that. I mean, that's one of the pieces, is that it's like a veil has been placed over the whole thing. And so because of that veil, people don't necessarily learn how to navigate it or how to talk about it, because it's almost as if it doesn't exist for white people. So it's a space to start like relearning. And like I said, it's not comfortable necessarily, but it is definitely necessary. And a lot of people are, and now with everything that's going on, because it was already necessary, but I think like with COVID and the way that COVID's playing itself out, and then add in the stuff that's going on right now with the rioting and stuff, with the George Floyd and, you know, Sean Reed and Breonna and Ahmaud, all of that. I think people are really like, I need to figure out what's going on. So there's definitely been a spike in enrollment.
So how can people enroll? Your next session begins June 11th, right?
Sure. June 11th. It's we have 2 sessions. One is on Thursdays. That is the one that is now called Getting Started, and that's the one to start with. It's on Thursdays at 5:00 Pacific and 8:00 Eastern, and they just type in "my work to do," just all one word, myworktodo.com, and the registration is there. And then we have a second series, which has just been added about 3 weeks ago, which is people who have now participated in Getting Started, My Work to Do, Getting Started. Some people have participated in it 1 whole series, 2 whole series, 3 whole series, like then the 5-week series more than once, some people. And so we decided to start going deeper. And that is it has just different content. So the pattern, the way that the sessions are run is the same, but the content that we discuss is different. And it's a reflection space. It's not like a conversation, like a dialogue, 2 people talking back and forth. It actually is people watching the content, reading the article together, taking some time for journaling, considering, thinking, rethinking, and then sharing. So it's not like crosstalk. It's us listening to each other, learning how to maybe learn how to rethink about, learning how to reflect on, learning how to talk about, all of that. It's a reflection space.
If you would like to participate in My Work to Do, you can register for free at myworktodo.com. Thank you to Suzanne for speaking with me. I'm Lucy Grindon.
That's it for this edition of St. Mark's at Midweek. Thanks to our associate producers Emily Wright and Lucy Grindon. Another update from St. Mark's next Wednesday and our regular worship podcast on Sunday. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and be good to each other. I'm Matt Wright.